Names have been changed in this story to protect individuals and the integrity of the case. Like, subscribe so this stories can reach more people. In the early hours of March 11, 2012, a quiet trail near the Jordan River in Utah held a secret it would not keep for long. The river moved slowly that morning. No witnesses, no screams, just water, rock, and silence. Then the phone rang. A jogger's voice cut through the stillness as he dialed 911. He wasn't panicked, not yet, just confused. There was blood on the rocks. Too much blood. And something else. A single shoe caught at the water's edge. At first he tried to explain it away. Maybe an animal, maybe an accident, but even as he spoke, doubt crept into his words. The blood wasn't scattered randomly. It was pooled, smeared, splashed across the bridge like a warning. Police were dispatched immediately. They didn't know it yet, but this call would open one of the most twisted investigations the Jordan River had ever seen. Officers arrived just as dawn began to break. The bridge sat above the river like a narrow spine, connecting a quiet path used by runners, dog walkers, and cyclists. Beneath it, blood. Thick, dark stains clung to the rocks. More marked the concrete. Drops trailed toward the water as if something or someone had been dragged. Forensic teams moved in carefully. Samples were collected. Minutes later, the result came back. Human blood. What unsettled investigators most wasn't just the amount, but the absence of a body. No injured person nearby. No witnesses waiting to explain what had happened. Search teams spread out along both sides of the river. Officers walked the trail. Divers scanned the water. Hours passed. Then downstream, someone saw it. A body drifting slowly near the opposite bank. A young girl. She had been in the water for hours. Her clothes were soaked, her face swollen, her injuries severe enough that officers struggled to identify her on sight. Nearby, one of her shoes was still missing. The other had already been found. Back at headquarters, the case escalated instantly. This wasn't a missing person anymore. This was a homicide. Police released limited details to the media, careful not to contaminate the investigation. A teenage girl, found near the Jordan River, clothing description shared, a request for the public's help. About a mile away, in a quiet suburban home, a woman named Rachel Monroe turned on her television. She wasn't expecting anything unusual. But as the anchor spoke, Rachel felt something shift in her chest. The description too familiar, the age too close, the location uncomfortably near. Her daughter, 15-year-old Emily Monroe, had vanished the night before. Rachel's hands began to shake. Emily lived with her mother Rachel and her stepfather Mark Monroe. The family's Saturday night had been unremarkable. Rachel and Mark returned home from dinner. Emily greeted them at the door. She seemed normal, happy, even. Nothing felt wrong. Rachel went to shower. Mark stayed downstairs. At some point, Emily walked away from the kitchen. No argument, no goodbye. An hour later, Rachel noticed something strange. She hadn't seen Emily since they got home. Rachel checked her bedroom. Empty. Mark came upstairs holding something in his hand, a folded note he'd found in another room. The letter said Emily had run away. She claimed she was going to California, that she had lied to her friends, that she couldn't keep living with the lie. At the bottom of the page, a single letter was written in parentheses. P. Rachel and Mark called the police immediately. Emily was reported as a runaway. At the time, no one questioned it. The next morning, Rachel watched the news again. This time, the story had advanced. The girl found in the river was believed to be a teenager. Police asked families with missing children to come forward. Rachel called the tip line. She gave Emily's name, her height, her clothes. Then the officer asked one question. Did she have braces? Rachel broke down. When DNA results arrived, the truth became official. The girl pulled from the Jordan River was Emily Monroe. She had not run away. She had never made it to California. Investigators turned their attention to Emily's background. Her early life had been unstable: foster homes, case workers, temporary placements. Rachel had once been one of those case workers. Over time, she'd bonded with Emily. Eventually, she adopted her. Even after a divorce and a blended family, Emily finally had something she'd never truly known before: a permanent home. That context mattered, because it raised a troubling question. Why would a girl who fought so hard for stability suddenly leave it behind? Detectives searched Emily's room. They collected her phone, her laptop, and a bag filled with journals. Inside the journals, one name appeared over and over: Ethan Parker, Emily's boyfriend. Classmates confirmed the relationship. So did rumors, ones that spread quickly through school. Emily had told people she was pregnant with Ethan's child. But the autopsy revealed something else. Emily was not pregnant. So why had she said she was? Ethan was a minor, so his father sat beside him during questioning. He spoke calmly, softly. He described Emily as emotional, confused, obsessed with the idea of having a family. He admitted she'd talked about running away. He said he tried to stop her. But something about Ethan's behavior stood out. He was detached. His movements stiff, his posture closed, his answers precise but oddly rehearsed. Then he volunteered a strange detail. Emily had gotten a nosebleed at a friend's house earlier that night. A few drops of blood had landed on his shoe. He wanted police to know that. Immediately. Detectives took note. People rarely explain evidence before it's questioned. By the end of the first day, police believed they were looking for someone else. A mysterious second boy Emily had been talking to. A name pulled from whispers, journals, and fear. A name that didn't seem to belong to anyone real. Yet, the investigation had direction. And that direction pointed away from the river and straight into a web of lies that would take years to untangle. As investigators dug deeper into Emily Monroe's final days, one name kept resurfacing. Not Ethan Parker, but someone else. A boy Emily had mentioned in her journal. A boy her friends whispered about. A boy no one had ever actually seen. She called him Lucas. According to Emily, Lucas was dangerous, connected, someone to fear. Her friends claimed he'd made threats, that he warned Ethan to stay away, that he was part of something violent, maybe even a gang. Yet when detectives asked for descriptions, they hit a wall. No photos. No social media. No school records. Lucas existed only in stories. And still, every version of the story ended with the same implication. If Emily was killed, Lucas had motive. Police turned back to Ethan. They needed to verify his movements during the narrow window when Emily was believed to have died. According to Ethan, after speaking with her that night, he stayed home, played video games, later walked to his grandmother's house just a few doors down. His father confirmed it. His grandmother, Martha Parker, confirmed it too. At first, the timeline seemed solid, but investigators noticed inconsistencies. Times that shifted. Details that didn't quite align. And then there was the phone data, still waiting to be analyzed. For now, detectives moved on. Another name came up repeatedly: Ryan Keller. Ryan was a close friend of both Ethan and Emily. He was the one whose house Emily had supposedly been at earlier that evening. If the nosebleed story was true, Ryan should have seen it. Detectives brought him in. Ryan explained that he'd been out at the gym with his younger brother that night, gone for hours. When he returned home, he saw missed calls, but nothing else. He confirmed parts of Ethan's story. Emily had been close to Ethan. She talked about running away. She mentioned Lucas. Ryan also added something new. He said Emily and everyone else had been afraid of Lucas. That fear, he claimed, was real. Still, there was no proof Lucas existed. Days turned into a week. Police canvassed schools, neighborhoods, youth groups, gang databases. Nothing. No Lucas. No teenager matching the descriptions given. Pressure mounted. Then, just as the investigation threatened to go cold, a phone call came in. The caller said she had information. She said she'd seen everything. Her name was Jenna Fowler. Detectives recognized it immediately. Jenna had a long history with law enforcement, mostly nonviolent offenses: fraud, theft, drug-related charges. She didn't call out of guilt. She called with an offer. She claimed she had witnessed Emily's murder and wanted immunity in exchange for her story. Desperate for progress, investigators listened. Jenna's account was detailed. Too detailed. She claimed Emily had been at a house with Lucas and another man, that an argument turned violent, that Emily was beaten, that her body was later transported and dumped near the Jordan River. She described blood, panic cleanup. She named a second suspect, Derek Cole, a known felon with a violent record. According to Jenna, Derek's house was the crime scene. The story was shocking, and on the surface it fit. Police obtained a warrant and raided Derek Cole's home. Inside, they found signs of recent renovations. Fresh paint, removed carpet, suspicious stains on doors and baseboards. Derek was arrested. Under interrogation, he denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Emily, didn't know Lucas, didn't know Jenna's story. But his criminal past worked against him. For a moment, it seemed like the case was finally breaking open. Then the forensic results came back. None of the blood in Derek's house matched Emily. Not one sample. Phone records placed Derek miles away from the Jordan River that night. The entire theory unraveled. Detectives went back to Jenna. This time, under pressure, her story changed. Then it fell apart completely. Jenna confessed. She hadn't witnessed Emily's murder. She had fabricated the entire story. Her motive wasn't justice. It was revenge. Derek had cut her out of a criminal deal weeks earlier. She wanted him punished and saw Emily's case as the perfect opportunity. She admitted she'd studied news reports, press conferences, and online speculation. She stitched together a narrative convincing enough to derail the investigation for nearly a year. The damage was done. The real killer had more time, more distance, and more confidence. Forced back to square one, detectives reviewed every lead from the beginning. That's when they found them. 3 tip calls. All overlooked. All disturbing. One caller reported seeing a teenage boy on a bicycle leaning far over the bridge near the Jordan River the night Emily died. Another described a young male earlier that day, packing near Rotary Park muttering, "I won't get caught." The third tip came from Ethan himself. He'd reported receiving threats from Lucas. The pattern was clear. All signs pointed back to a teenager. Not a gang member. Not a hardened criminal. A boy hiding in plain sight. The investigation had been poisoned by lies, some born of fear, others of greed. But beneath every false trail was the same truth waiting to surface. Lucas didn't exist, and the person closest to Emily had never really left her side that night. By the time daylight fully settles over the riverbank, Investigators already sense that something is wrong, not because of what has been found, but because of what hasn't. The body is gone. No clear trail. No witnesses who saw anything happen. Only a story. And stories, detectives know, are where the truth usually begins to leak. The man who made the 911 call is brought in for questioning just hours after the discovery. For now, he is treated as a witness, not a suspect. His fictional name in the records, Daniel Mercer. He is cooperative, calm, almost detached. He tells officers he came to the river that morning to clear his head, that he noticed something strange near the water, that he assumed it was animal remains until he saw the shoe. Then the blood. Then the realization that something terrible had happened. He insists he did the right thing. He called for help. And at first, nothing he says directly contradicts the evidence. But detectives are not listening for facts. They're listening for patterns. Daniel's account is simple, almost too simple. He says he arrived alone. He says he didn't touch anything. He says he didn't recognize the shoe. He says he didn't see anyone else nearby. Yet when detectives replay the 911 call, small details begin to stand out. The tone shifts. The sudden urgency. The moment where confusion turns into panic too fast. Experienced investigators know this phenomenon well. People who stumble upon traumatic scenes usually hesitate. They struggle to process what they're seeing. Their fear builds gradually. Daniel's fear doesn't build. It arrives fully formed. As questioning continues, detectives ask a simple but revealing question. How did you know it was a woman? There is a pause. Daniel answers quickly, saying it was just a guess. The shoe looked small. The clothing seemed feminine. But the shoe had not yet been publicly identified. And at the time of the call, officers aren't certain themselves. It's a minor detail. But true crime cases rarely unravel because of major mistakes. They unravel because of tiny certainties where there should be none. While Daniel remains in the interview room, another team begins working backwards. If a body was here, it had to come from somewhere. They widen the search radius. Check missing persons reports. Review recent calls involving disturbances near the river. And that's when a name quietly enters the investigation. A woman reported missing less than 24 hours earlier. Her fictional name, Emily Rourke. Last known location, just 5 miles from where the blood was found. Emily's disappearance had not yet triggered alarms. She was an adult. No history of running into danger. No immediate signs of foul play. But when detectives contact her family, something changes. Emily didn't just vanish. She had plans. She had messages unanswered. And she had mentioned someone new in her life. Someone she trusted. Someone named Daniel. The timeline tightens. Phone records place Daniel and Emily together the night before the discovery. Text messages show an argument, nothing explosive but tense enough to linger. Then silence. Emily's phone stops pinging around midnight. Daniel's continues moving. Toward the river. Back in the interview room, detectives circle back. They ask Daniel about Emily. This time his posture shifts. He leans forward. His voice lowers. He sighs, as if exhausted by grief that no one else can see. He says they were seeing each other casually. That things were complicated. That they argued but it wasn't serious. He insists he hasn't seen her since the previous evening. Yet the phone data says otherwise. And now, for the first time, Daniel is no longer just telling a story. He is defending one. Investigators don't confront him immediately. They let the silence work. They allow Daniel to fill the gaps himself. And slowly, unintentionally, he does. He corrects detectives before they finish questions. He clarifies details no one asked about. He grows frustrated, not with the situation but with the pace. It's subtle, but the tone has changed. This is no longer a witness trying to help. This is a man trying to stay ahead. Outside, forensic teams return to the riverbank. They find drag marks partially erased by water, a disturbed patch of soil near the tree line, and something else, another shoe, matching the first. By the end of the day, investigators are no longer asking what happened. They are asking how much of Daniel's story is real and how much was rehearsed. Because somewhere between the river and the interview room, the case has shifted. And the man who called for help is no longer standing outside the circle. He is standing at the center of it. By the second night, the investigation has taken on a different gravity. This is no longer a search for answers. It is a search for truth buried under intention. Daniel Mercer remains in police custody, not charged, not free. A man suspended in the narrow space between suspicion and certainty. And that space is shrinking. Detectives reconstruct the final 12 hours of Emily Rourke's life minute by minute, movement by movement. Surveillance cameras show Emily entering Daniel's apartment building just before 9:00 p.m. No footage shows her leaving. Daniel claims she stormed out after an argument. Claims he watched her walk down the street, unharmed. But cameras outside the building tell a quieter story. At 10:47 p.m., Daniel exits alone. He is carrying something large, wrapped loosely in what appears to be a blanket. He struggles with the weight. He does not look back. Investigators replay the footage repeatedly. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it refuses to show. Emily never appears again. Inside Daniel's apartment, forensic teams move carefully. Nothing obvious at first glance. No overturned furniture. No visible signs of violence. But violence rarely announces itself. It hides. Luminol reveals faint traces in the bathroom. Along the edge of the tub. Near the drain. Cleaned but not enough. And when detectives find a receipt for industrial-strength cleaning supplies purchased just after midnight, the case takes another turn. Back in the interview room, Daniel is informed that Emily is officially considered missing. His reaction is immediate and rehearsed. He rubs his face. He shakes his head. He says all the right things. But something is missing. Urgency. A man truly worried about someone doesn't ask when he can go home. Daniel does. Detectives decide it's time to apply pressure, not forcefully but strategically. They begin pointing out inconsistencies. Not accusations. Observations. They mention the cameras, the phone data, the receipts. Each detail lands like a small weight added to Daniel's chest. He doesn't explode. He compresses. His sentences grow shorter. His answers more precise. Too precise. Then comes the question that fractures everything. Why did you lie about leaving alone? Daniel pauses. Longer than before. The room feels still. He finally admits Emily didn't leave angry. She stayed longer. They talked. Things calmed down. He says she fell asleep. And then, according to him, she woke up panicked and ran out. No explanation. No trigger. Just fear. The detectives don't respond. They let the silence stretch. Because silence is where lies echo. Meanwhile, search teams expand the area near the river. Dogs alert near a bend downstream. Divers are brought in, and late that evening, something surfaces. Not the body, but evidence that confirms what investigators already know. Emily didn't leave on her own. She was taken there. Back in custody, Daniel senses the shift. He begins talking without being prompted. He says he loved Emily, that he would never hurt her, that people misunderstand him. He blames stress, alcohol, miscommunication, anything but choice. This is the moment investigators recognize something chilling. Daniel isn't afraid of what happened. He's afraid of being understood. Because once his actions are clear, his control disappears. By the third day, the investigation is no longer quiet. It hums. Phones ring constantly. Officers move with urgency that no longer needs explanation. Every person involved understands the same thing. Daniel Mercer's story is collapsing, but not on its own. Something has to push it. The turning point doesn't come from the river. It comes from something far smaller. A device Daniel forgot about. Investigators recover Emily Rourke's phone from a drainage culvert, less than half a mile from Daniel's apartment. It's damaged but not destroyed. Digital forensics works patiently, pulling fragments from what remains. Messages, location data, a final audio file saved automatically by the phone during the last moments of movement. It isn't clear, but it is enough. Emily's voice is there. Not screaming, not panicked, confused. She asks a question, one that suggests she doesn't understand what's happening or why. Then the audio ends abruptly. For detectives, this changes everything. Up until now, Daniel's version of events relied on chaos, on sudden fear, on emotional unpredictability. But the audio tells a different story. A controlled moment. A quiet one. And quiet moments are intentional. Daniel is brought back into the interview room. This time there is no soft entry. No small talk. No easing in. Detectives place the phone on the table between them. They don't explain where it was found. They don't play the recording. They don't need to. Daniel recognizes it instantly. His eyes drop. And for the first time since the investigation began, he says nothing. Silence stretches. Minutes pass. Finally, Daniel asks a question. Is she okay? No one answers. Detectives explain slowly that Emily's phone contradicts his account, that her final movements don't match panic, that her voice doesn't match fear. They explain that the timeline no longer has room for his version of events. And they tell him something else. They have enough to move forward without him. This is the moment where many people confess. Daniel does not. Instead, he reframes. He says Emily misunderstood him, that things escalated unintentionally, that he tried to help. He never says the word hurt. He never says the word kill. He speaks only in vague, passive language. Things happened. Mistakes were made. Outcomes occurred. But detectives push once more. They ask why he cleaned the apartment, why he lied about the blanket, why he knew details no one else did. Daniel's breathing changes. And finally, almost quietly, he says, I didn't plan it. That sentence lands heavier than any confession. Because planning is not the question anymore. Responsibility is. Outside the interview room, paperwork moves quickly. Charges are prepared. A warrant is signed. Daniel Mercer is formally arrested. Later that evening, search teams return to the river with new information. And this time they find her. Emily Rourke is recovered downstream, where the water slows and holds on to what it's given. The search ends. The case does not. Daniel is informed the next morning. He closes his eyes, not in grief, in resignation. When Emily Rourke is recovered from the river, the town changes. Not dramatically, not loudly. It changes in the way places do when something unspeakable has happened. With lowered voices, longer pauses, and glances that linger just a second too long. The river is blocked off. The path where people once jogged in the mornings is empty. And a quiet understanding settles in. This was not an accident. This was not fate. This was a choice. Daniel Mercer is charged within days. The list is precise, clinical, unemotional, but the weight of it is unmistakable. He appears in court wearing a neutral expression, eyes fixed forward, hands folded. No visible reaction as the charges are read. No visible reaction when Emily's name is spoken aloud. Those seated behind him notice something unsettling. Daniel looks relieved, as if the uncertainty has finally ended. The trial becomes a slow unraveling of the person Daniel believed himself to be. Prosecutors do not portray him as a monster. They don't need to. Instead, they present him as something more familiar and more dangerous. A man obsessed with control. A man who feared being seen as ordinary. A man who believed he could manage outcomes if he managed people. Witnesses testify. Friends describe Daniel as intense, charming, deeply attentive, until contradicted. Former partners speak of arguments that ended abruptly, not because they were resolved, but because resistance became exhausting. Emily's family takes the stand. They speak softly, carefully. They talk about plans Emily had made, about a future that now exists only as possibility. The courtroom listens. Daniel does not look at them. The evidence is methodical. Phone records, surveillance footage, forensic analysis. Each piece is small on its own. Together, they form something impossible to escape. The prosecution never claims Daniel lost control. They argue something colder, that he asserted it. The defense offers an alternative narrative. They suggest misinterpretation, emotional volatility, an argument that went too far. But the story cannot withstand the structure of the evidence, because accidents don't require lies to survive. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberates. Not long. The verdict is delivered on a gray afternoon. Guilty. Daniel does not react. He exhales once. That is all. At sentencing, the judge speaks not of anger, but of accountability. Of how silence can be weaponized. Of how calm can disguise harm. Of how danger does not always arrive loudly. Daniel is sentenced to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. The room remains still. There is no applause. No relief. Only the understanding that nothing about this outcome restores what was taken. In the months that follow, Emily's name fades from headlines, but not from memory. Her family establishes a foundation in her honor. One focused on early warning signs, on listening when something feels wrong, even when nothing looks wrong. The river is eventually reopened. People return, but those who remember still slow their steps when they pass that bend in the water. Because this case did not hinge on rage. It hinged on entitlement, on the belief that another person's autonomy could be negotiated away. Long after the verdict is delivered, after the courtroom empties and the cameras are turned off, the case continues to exist. Not in files, not in transcripts, but in memory. Because cases like this do not end, they settle. Daniel Mercer is transferred to a permanent facility hundreds of miles away from the river. There are no interviews, no statements of remorse, no final attempts to explain himself. He becomes what many like him ultimately become: a name in a database, a number on a door, a story others will try to understand long after he stops telling it. Emily Rourke's name is spoken more carefully now. By her family, by friends, by people who never met her but feel as though they did. She is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. For her laughter, for her independence, for the future that once felt so certain it didn't need defending. Investigators involved in the case reflect privately on what made it different. Not the violence, not the outcome, but the absence of warning signs that scream. Daniel never fit the image people expect. He wasn't volatile. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't visibly dangerous. He was controlled. And that, they say, is what made him so difficult to see coming. The river continues to flow. It carries no memory of what it held. No judgment. No truth. That burden belongs to the people left behind, to the questions they ask themselves. Could this have been stopped? Could something have been noticed sooner? Could silence have been broken before it became final? True crime often promises answers, but this case offers something else. A reminder that danger does not always arrive with chaos, that violence does not always announce itself, that the most unsettling stories are not about monsters, but about people who believed they were entitled to decide someone else's fate. In the end, this case is not about a river or a courtroom or a confession that never fully came. It is about control mistaken for calm, about lies told softly enough to sound reasonable, and about the cost of ignoring the moments that feel wrong simply because they look normal. Emily Rourke did not disappear. She was taken, and remembering that truth clearly, honestly, is the only justice that remains.